My name is Andrew Stotts, and I'm talking about careers in finance with David Adu. David, welcome to the show. And can you introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing right now?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andrew. My name is David Adu. Um, I'm an investment research analyst with Meristem Securities Limited. Part of my responsibilities as an analyst is to provide equity research coverage of some of the companies that are on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So personally, I am in charge of the banking sector. So I assume equity coverage of the banking sector, basically the stocks listed on the exchange, banking stocks listed on the exchange. Also, I recently started equity coverage of the telecom sector as well. That is when MTN Nigeria and Airtel Africa listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So eventually that created the telecom sector, and now I'm also on that desk as well. So aside equities, I also provide macroeconomic research. I provide research support to the macroeconomics team. I'm also on the fixed income team as well. So basically, we provide recommendations on fixed income instruments, the development in the market as well. So just general trends, developments in that space. Provide research coverage on that. Yeah, that's pretty much sums it up.
Well, we have something in common besides the fact that your name
Okay.
is my father's name. But the other thing is that we have in common is that I started my career as a bank analyst in 1993. And
Oh,
one of the things that I appreciate about why that was such a good thing was because I had to learn about economics. You know, you can cover a telecom company, you could cover a consumer company without really being strong in economics, but it's very difficult to cover a bank without doing some work on what's GDP growth and what's happening with interest rates and that type of thing. I'm curious, how do you feel about covering the banks?
that's a pretty interesting question because for me, I joined Meristem. I started the banking research after a couple of an experience with the FMCG sector. So I was prior to this, I was working in an FMCG firm, and also coupled with the fact that I actually studied industrial chemistry in school. So it was quite challenging because at the beginning I didn't really have much of an understanding of how the banks work, basically. So it was a case of having to do a lot of reading because that was very, very important. So how does the economic conditions, how do they affect the bank? How do they make money? How do they make money really? So that is, you're looking at the
Mm.
spread, interest environment, the yield on interest earning assets, and you're comparing that with, okay, what is the cost at which they're obtaining those funds? You're looking at the non-interest side. I mean, starting to understand all that, and also the fact that the banks are highly regulated, so there are a lot of prudential ratios that are necessary that they need to meet, and those basically signal the health of those banks as well. So it was quite a challenge. I needed to do a lot of reading to be able to get myself up to speed, and so far it's been a very interesting experience.
You come from a engineering background, and I,
Chemistry, to be
chemist.
precise.
Okay, chemistry, and I
Yes.
also are you a musician?
Yes, I actually play the musical instruments. I play the bass guitar and I play keyboards.
You got
I
a
play the
lot of different
keyboard.
skills. That's pretty cool.
I do that in my spare time. I am when I was much younger, I got exposed to this. I was in the choir, so I mean, it was very easy for me to pick this up, and it stayed with me over the years. So it's
That's
something
great.
I really enjoy in my spare time.
That's great. And I noticed that there's what's kind of interesting is, I talk to a lot of people around the world in the area of finance, and you find out that many of them studied engineering. And then they tried to transition into the world of finance. And I'm just curious, obviously, if you're coming from, chemistry or engineering or that type of background, a science type of background, and going
Yeah.
into finance, you got a lot you got to learn about what's a balance sheet and all that stuff. But once you've learned the foundation, is there anything that an engineer has learned or knows that helps them to be better in the world of finance?
Yes, there are, because basically you are now able to see it from both sides, really. So I'll give an example. Um, okay, aside the banks, at various times I was able to analyze even some companies in the FMCG space. So if I was to use that, compare that with my upbringing as a chemist, I understand how I understand basically the operations. Having also worked in the field, I understand some intricacies that if I didn't have this experience, I would not really be able to appreciate. Yes, I can speak to some evolution in the industry and say that, okay, yes, this is what is happening, this is what is happening, this is what is happening. But I would not really be able to appreciate the magnitude of how this affects the companies, except I have that in-depth experience. And that is one added advantage that I think we bring to the table as well. So combining your experience as an engineer, combining your experience as a chemist or as a biologist or whatever science subject you studied in school, that gives you an added advantage with when you also understand the financial aspect as well.
It's a good reminder for those people that are studying finance. It's not enough just to know the numbers. You've got to try to understand business. And I remember I started my career in 1993, and then in 1995 my best friend came to see me, and we in Thailand, where I am, and he flew from America, and we basically decided, let's start a coffee factory, and we would start
Okay.
roasting and selling coffee. That business now is 25 years old, so we've had it for a
Wow.
long time. But as a young analyst trying to improve myself, I found that the experience of trying to start and run a business, which he mainly ran it, but we talked about it every day, and on weeknights and on weekends I may work on the accounting or work on stuff with him. It provided me with an insight that I think a lot of other people don't necessarily get. So your comment about getting some experience and some different angle, it's just not enough to have the numbers. The numbers don't speak. They don't sing. We have to know the
I'm saying,
story
yeah,
behind the numbers.
definitely, definitely, definitely. I agree with you. I mean,
And if we go back in time, when you were thinking about working in finance and in this area, but yet you had studied chemistry, what was going through your mind about, could I transition into that field? What was going in through your mind, and think about some maybe engineers now that are asking themselves, could I do it? Is it worth doing, to switch into finance? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
that's a very interesting story because for me, um, chemistry was a very interesting subject because I found myself always, I just found I just knew it. I didn't need to spend a lot of time reading, understanding those abstract concepts. I just found myself knowing it once my lecturer teaches us in class, understanding. But beyond that, that was in school. Beyond that, it now moves to, okay, now that I know these things, what do I really want to do with this knowledge after school? So I would say that the sciences industry um, is not as advanced as it is in other economies in Nigeria here. So there's the quality of research, the amount of research funding that goes into research and all is not as deep as that. So the ability to travel this part was not really there. So I just asked myself that, okay, so what do I really want to do? Which it was an honest question that took me quite some time. So I found myself needing to read a lot of books at that particular point in time. So I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read Cash Flow Quadrant by Kiyosaki, and that's really got me thinking financial freedom and all that. So eventually, that started my journey to reading a lot of books. I found myself reading finance books, and I eventually found my way to Warren Buffett. So I got to study about Warren Buffett, understand the way he does his business, how he grew up and all. And that's I was fascinated by that really. That eventually led me to studying. And then when the opportunity came to join Meristem, the research firm, I just jumped at it. And I mean, I get asked this question a lot of time, but I
Mhm.
mean, that was what led to me joining this. And it has been a very rewarding experience.
And how did you get the opportunity even to get a job there? I mean, some people would say, "Oh, I studied chemistry, therefore, how am I going to even be able to get a job interview or that type of thing?"
Okay, for me, it was a case of just waiting for the right time because prior to this, I applied for a lot of firms. I was not able to get an interview because I even, coupled with the fact that I came out with a first class degree in industrial chemistry, that was not enough to even get me a seat at the table. But when the opportunity came to, the Meristem was recruiting, so a friend just told me to submit my CV, applied the normal process, and I did. And then I got called for the interviews, the online, do computer-based tests, do written tests, do um, interviews and the like. So it was just because I was able to prepare. I prepared even before the opportunity came. So
Mhm.
that's why I was able to get it, not because of any other thing, but just because of the preparation. Eventually, the time will come, and once you're prepared, you'll get it.
So maybe you could explain to the listeners about what are the skills required to be successful in your job, besides obviously, education, but really what are the core skills?
Okay, the core skills, you will need to do a lot of research. So when you want to carry out effective research, you need to be able to understand um, how to analyze an industry, the drivers, so applying five forces, Porter's five forces model, um, pistol analysis, the SWOT analysis and the like. So you need to be able to, first of all, have those research skills, be inquisitive. And aside that, you also need to have some hard skills. Financial modeling is
Mm.
key. You have to go to carry out valuation because effectively, after your analysis will translate into you valuing whatever company it is in that sector and also advising investors on a price, which is very very important. So you need to be able to, aside the research skills, you need to have good financial modeling skills. You need to have valuation. You also need to, well, PowerPoints. You need to be able to do. You're going to do presentations at various points, so you need to have good PowerPoint skills as well. The remaining are just soft skills that I believe once you have the right attitude, you'll be able to survive in wherever you find yourself.
Mm. And are your clients mainly institutional clients or individual clients?
So we have a blend of institutional and retail clients. So Merisem is focused largely on retail clients. We have the largest um, retail base amongst our peers. Also, we have a strong network of institutional clients that also form our client base as well.
Interesting. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up there, but do you have any advice for young people that are considering to enter into the world of finance?
Um, the main advice is this: just simply, you have to know that this is what you want, because um, especially if you're coming from a different field. When you're coming from a different field, then you have to be absolutely sure that this is what you want to do, and you're ready to make those sacrifices. Because I have to tell you, the journey is not easy because you have to do a lot of reading. a lot of reading. You're competing against people that probably have maybe 4 years, 5 years ahead of you. So you have to bring yourself to that same knowledge base in a shorter period of time. So that is very, very important. You have to be sure that this is what you want, and you have to put your head down, get to do a lot of reading. At the beginning, it might seem quite challenging, but just hold on. After a while, it starts to sink in, and you get to understand that this stuff is not really that difficult. You know it. And when you progress, it starts to become a lot more rewarding and a lot more interesting as you go on. You get to do a lot of interesting projects. I mean, it's a rewarding choice eventually.
Amen. I've enjoyed, I mean, I was an equity analyst and a head of research my whole career, basically, and I enjoyed it very much. And also, like you said, you got to constantly be learning. I mean, people come to my office, and this is my home office behind me I'm in, and there's about 500 books on my shelves right here, and they're like, wow, that's a lot of books. And I think I've read 5,000 over the last 30 years.
Wow, that's a lot.
You know, whatever
That's a lot.
there's a tiny number of the ones that I've read. And the point is that every book brings you, every good book brings you something valuable. And that,
Definitely.
and I take a lot of notes when I find a good book. I really try to write out things a bit. And I have notes. I have my notebooks from 20 years ago when I was reading particular books, like Porter's books on competitive advantage and things like that. The point is that the knowledge that you gain through reading and studying and the work you do, whether that's CFA or whatever, is something that nobody can take away from you. And that's magic. And in fact, that was my ticket for me when I was a young guy out of high school. I didn't have any money, and my parents wouldn't pay for university. So knowledge was the only thing that I could figure out I wanted to accumulate, that I felt like nobody could take it away from me. So
That's good.
I love, it's great to talk to you, to kind of, to feel the excitement of those early days when you're learning all that stuff and bringing it on board, and, that's exciting time. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. It's really
yeah.
exciting because then you get to understand how various things work. Because another thing is that we get asked daily is, so we as research analysts, you're supposed to understand and filter every information that passes, that goes by daily. So now there's coronavirus, there's oil prices, and then someone's asking you, how does this impact me as an investor? What do I do? What actions should I take? So the fact that you have this knowledge, you're able to filter and interpret information appropriately, that gives you an edge. And seeing people benefit from the recommendations that you give to them is also a very, very fulfilling. It's a very fulfilling thing. Yeah.
That's exciting. And yeah, I mean, the great thing about keeping learning is that it's a little bit like, if you imagine that I was a young guy and I asked the teacher, could you teach me to play piano? And they said, yeah, I'll teach you. And then I say, look, I listened to Keith Jarrett, one of the best piano players of all time, jazz piano player, and his solos are amazing. Can you teach me that?
Okay.
And the teacher's going to say, no, slow down. You got to learn the fundamentals first.
That's where to start from.
We don't teach solos, except for there's a small number of geniuses that may be able to do it. But for 99.9% of us, we've got to learn the foundations first. But, one thing, David, that you have to look forward to is that the longer that you keep learning and improving and building that foundation, over time, you're going to feel comfortable to move away from that foundation. And, and that's where I think the real satisfaction comes. The first stage satisfaction in the job of being an equity analyst comes from just absorbing all the stuff and thinking, okay, how does this work? And being able to put the pieces together. And that's so satisfying. But when you can start taking the pieces apart and then start to create your own way of thinking that could be very different from other people's, is where you really, the true job satisfaction comes into play. And that's why being an equity analyst is a job that could satisfy your mind for a lifetime.
Interesting. It is very interesting.
So I'll be watching your solo performances over the years, and I just want to thank you for sharing your experience. I know it will be
Thank you very
inspiration
much.
for a lot of young people who are thinking about getting into the field of finance. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me as well.